My daughter told me she didn't want me at her wedding. Those were the words. Plain. Cold. A sentence that landed like a weight on my chest and kept me from breathing for a long beat. I was standing in her living room with a navy dress folded over my arm, simple, the color she'd once said looked like my eyes, and the sunlight through the curtains cut a stripe across the floor. Mariana sat on the couch, knees together, thumbed the edge of a cushion as if avoiding looking at me. Raphael stood behind her, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. Between them, the air was sharp, almost metallic. "Please," Mariana said. "Mom, I don't want you at the wedding." I remember the way the word wedding felt suddenly strange in my mouth, as if it belonged to someone else's life. For 30 years, I had been the one to stitch up scraped knees, to stay up nights with feverish heads, to sign permission slips and enrollments and scholarships. I had been the one to hold the line when money ran out. I had been the one to make sure she never wanted for a thing she needed. And now, in a living room that still smelled faintly of jasmine from the bouquet she'd brought home last week, she told me I wasn't wanted on the day I had been saving for, literally saving for, my whole life. You will hear all kinds of things meant to soften a blow. There were none of them. They had none of them. They had rehearsed everything else, guest lists, floral palettes, the seating chart, but not this mercy. Instead, my daughter announced exclusion like an ordinance. She had the look of someone delivering a verdict, and Raphael had the look of someone relieved to be the judge. For a moment, I clung to the dress because it was a thing we could still touch. The fabric had come out of my closet with the hope that I would be the one to stand by her side, that I would sit among the guests who loved her. It was a dark navy, the kind that doesn't demand attention but doesn't hide either. Exactly what I'd wanted. Dignified, modest, clean. I had bought it months ago with a certain economy, the way I made decisions when there were college fees to pay and a mortgage to be tamed. It felt like a small sacrament. Now it felt like an accusation. "Why?" I asked. My voice was quieter than I'd expected. That quiet was the part that surprised me the most. It didn't come from weakness. It came from that old, deep place in a mother that measures losses before protesting. Because often, it's the small inventories, the things you count in secret, that explain the rest. Mariana looked at Raphael like she needed permission to be honest, then back at me. "Raphael's family, they don't want people who make us look poor. They said it would be better if only close friends and family who fit the image were there. He, Raphael, said it would be awkward. And I don't want to argue about it, not now." Make us look poor. The phrase repeated in my head until it sounded obscene. Poor. As if the love folded in the wrinkles of a life could be measured against someone else's idea of taste. I could have fallen apart right there. I could have asked for an explanation with a list of receipts, of evenings I skipped so she could have violin lessons, of the second job I took when that scholarship fell through, of the watches I sold one Christmas when pockets were empty just so she could have a warm coat. I could have stood, voice raw and pleading, and begged to be allowed to sit among the people who would promise her forever. I could have done what daughters expect mothers to do, that is, love without conditions until there are no conditions left to give. Instead, because I had been a lawyer for most of my adult life, the part of me that drafts letters and reads terms with patience rose like a glass wall. Not because I wanted to be clever, because at that moment I needed clarity. I needed to know where I stood, and to make sure my dignity was not auctioned off in the same breath that they thanked me for my contribution. "You mean," I said, and my hand tightened on the dress until my knuckles were white, "the dress I paid for?" Silence answered first. Then Raphael moved as if to step between us, a reflex that revealed his role more than any words would. Mariana's face crumpled. "We told the vendors you were paying for it, but we asked them to keep it discreet," she said. "We asked them not to mention." This was the sequence I had been building toward without knowing it. Years of small transactions, of signing checks, of putting my name on forms so that her life could move without the friction of our scarcity, had culminated in a knot I hadn't noticed until now. The dress, the reception hall, the caterer, the florist, the band, the photographer, they were all things I had touched with my money. I had paid deposits in my name. I had signed contracts when her hands were busy with work and planning. In my instincts, the contracts were papers. To her, the payments were something to be hidden. "I don't want to be a secret donor at my daughter's wedding," I said, and I could hear the surprise in my own voice. It was a statement that had nothing to do with pride as most people imagine it. It was a boundary. It was the recognition that affection becomes humiliation the moment it is kept behind the curtain. Raphael cleared his throat. "You don't have to." "No," I said, and it was gentle but firm. "I don't want to stay if I'm only going to be seen as a transaction." There are moments in life when the obvious is revealed with a force you can't anticipate. I could see in Mariana's face 1,000 small calculations. Betrayal, the face of her father's absence being filled by someone's approval that excluded me. I could see the fear that the people she loved might choose comfort over truth. Raphael cleared his throat. "You don't have to." "No," I said, and it was gentle but firm. "I don't want to stay if I'm only going to be seen as a transaction." There are moments in life when the obvious is revealed with a force you can't anticipate. I could see in Mariana's face 1,000 small calculations. Betrayal, the face of her father's absence being filled by someone's approval that excluded me. I could see the fear that the people she loved might choose comfort over truth. I could also see that the decision to ban me wasn't just hers. It was fed by a network of judgments, by the whispering, by the class that felt safer when it polished its edges. I remember thinking of the nights I had declined invitations. The economies performed so she could have a debut, a trip, a camera for art school. The little ledger of ordinary sacrifices that mothers never publish in public, but keep folded under pillowcases for the sake of sleep. I remember the cluttered kitchen table where I had sat with invoices and brochures, mapping out what could be paid this month and what would have to wait. I remember signing those contracts with a steady hand, the same hand that once comforted scraped knees. "See your phone," Mariana said suddenly, sharper than before. She held her own out, as if offering me proof. I took it, my fingers brushing her wrist. The screen lit with a cascade of messages, some polite, some anxious. The first was from a florist, final confirmation on seating and centerpiece designs. The next from the caterer, number of guests required for final invoice. Then a half dozen more, vendor confirmations, scheduling pins, a message from the photographer, "Can you confirm payment in full?" They were all addressed to the event planner, but the replies had been forwarded. Someone had been keeping me in the loop, in the practical, transactional way of a person who handles details. I scrolled down to see one message in particular, my own name attached to a payment. It hit me like a physical blow. Deposit paid, vendor contract signed by Helena Martins with my CPF and signature. I had assumed the courtesy of being informed. I had not thought they'd hide me behind a courtesy note. To them, to Raphael's world, I was not an invited guest. I was a problem to conceal. At the time, I don't think Mariana realized what she had done. She was trying to protect the picture she'd been promised, a seamless future with someone who liked the taste of curated households and quiet approval. In the glare of that decision, she cut me out to fit an image. It was easier to delete me from a guest list than wrestle with the awkwardness of a mother who had not been raised to fit that image. A simple human response rose in me. Hurt, yes, but also that careful, methodical resolve that a lifetime of practice does to a person. I did not want to create drama. I did not want to humiliate her publicly, nor did I want to manipulate her. I wanted her to understand that boundaries exist even in love. I wanted to make clear that paying for something does not give anyone the right to shame the person who paid. I thought of all the tiny rituals we'd had, baking in a kitchen thick with flour, sewing a costume till the needle pricked my finger, the way her head fit on my shoulder in a storm. I thought of her first day of school, clutching my hand as if the world might tear at the seams. I remembered the debt I had taken on to keep her in school when others suggested she might quit and find work. I remembered the nights on the phone with financial aid offices and the quiet meetings with landlords. She had not been unaware of the cost. She had been the centerpiece of every sacrifice. And yet, in that room, she was willing to erase those years with a sentence. I could have walked away then. I could have let her ban stand and retreated into a life of quiet indignation. But I had never been very good at letting humiliation be the currency of a relationship. Something in me, part mother, part professional, decided to respond in a way that would not be petty, but also would not accept invisibility. "Let me make a call," I said. No, it wasn't dramatic. I did not storm out with a tuba of lawyers behind me. I sat back down at her small kitchen table and opened my phone. I do this a lot. Read contracts, keep schedules, make lists. My life as a lawyer taught me that words have weight and timing has power. I didn't want to punish. I wanted consequences that matched the behavior. When someone treats you like a secret, you refuse the role. I tapped the number of the hall where the reception was booked. My finger hovered for a second. It felt strange to operate in that practical register with the exactness of someone who had drafted deadlines for a living. My voice on the phone was calm, trained, perhaps, from years of mediations and depositions. "This is Helena Martins," I said. "I need to confirm our booking for the event on the 20th. There are other concerns I need to discuss personally." There was a brief pause, a shuffle on the other end. "Yes, Miss Martins, we have your deposit on file. Are you confirming final guest numbers?" I told them I needed them to pause any public announcements about the guest list and to hold the vendors until I could confirm something. I did not explain my daughter's demand, though the truth of it lived in the back of my throat like a sour fruit. I said only what was necessary. My name was on the contract. The deposits were made in my name, and until I reached a different decision, they were to regard my instruction as binding. The voice on the other side was professional. They made notes. The word pause was enough, at least for now. I breathed out without realizing. I moved next to the florist. This time I left a direct message. No explanations, just an instruction to hold off on the centerpieces and to delay confirmation of the arrangements. The caterer was next. Reconsider guest numbers and hold the kitchen staff. The band, put a hold on the date for another week. The photographer, please hold final edits and we will decide soon. Finally, I texted the seamstress who had been tailoring the dress I held against my chest and told her to stop work and hold the fittings for the time being. Each message was pragmatic. I used my name, I referenced payments. I did not threaten, I did not gloat. I explained that the arrangements were now on hold pending confirmation by the payer, me. If you know anything about vendors, you know contracts are not just about money, they're about people and schedules too. When there's a pause, you create logistical friction. It's messy. And I needed it to be messy enough for my daughter to understand that exclusion was not costless. When I finished, I sent one final message. I typed it slowly, watching the words assemble, understanding their small brutality. "Mariana," I wrote, "you've told me I am not welcome at your wedding. I cannot be a secret. I've paused the arrangements until we speak." Then I sent it. We sat then in that uneven silence where grief and decision rub shoulders like strangers. Mariana's face drained of color. Raphael's jaw tightened and then opened, an action that was almost a hiss. He strode to the door and began pacing, the macho restlessness of someone who expects facts to rearrange themselves to his convenience. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I contacted the vendors," I said. "They were paid with my name on the contracts. I asked them to pause." There were a dozen ways this could go. The practical reality, that I had signed contracts and paid deposits, gave me leverage I had earned in years where I used my own name and credit to keep the fragile moving parts of our lives together. I had expected resistance, but not the immediate collapse of a plan. Within minutes, Mariana's phone started to buzz. Notifications, emails. The pings that had sounded like background noise before suddenly felt like an alarm. "Why would you?" Mariana began, then stopped. Her voice had the tremor of someone who had not quite realized she was in over her head. There is an intimacy to watching your child confront a consequence you set in motion. It is never pure triumph. It contains shards of guilt and a small, cold satisfaction that honesty sometimes carries. I was not proud of the hurt I saw cross her face. I was only conscious of the fact that she had seen, and in the seeing, might understand. "You didn't have to," Raphael snapped. "You could have." "I could have stayed silent while used my money as camouflage," I answered, "but I won't." He reached for his keys, half threatening to leave. "This is ridiculous. Weddings don't pause because someone's feelings got hurt." "Sometimes they do," I said. "Sometimes they pause because the people planning them are discovering whose feelings are being treated like currency. I will not be exchanged for decor." There was a muffled sound from Mariana's phone. A vendor had written, "Due to a dispute over payments, we are unable to guarantee staffing for the event on the scheduled date. Please contact us to resolve." Another, "We have placed a tentative hold on the hall for 1 week. Please advise." The pings were small percussion, like a drum roll that no one wanted. For a beat, nothing happened. Then Mariana fell into herself, shoulders folding, lips pressed together. She seemed very young in that instant, no longer an orchestrator of a future I've helped underwrite, but a scared woman who had split herself in two between the desire for acceptance and the exposure of a truth she had tried to hide. "You're making this worse," she whispered. "Maybe," I said, "but maybe I'm making the truth." The next few minutes unfurled like a scene treated with slow motion. Neighbors across the hall walked by, glancing at us the way community notices a bruise on someone they love, an expression of shock and curiosity bundled together. In the hallway, I heard Mrs. Celia's voice through paper-thin walls. "Everything all right in there?" As if civility could repair fractures that had been growing for years. My head was a ledger. I thought of the check made out to the photography studio, the deposit slip for the caterer that still had my handwriting on the back. I thought of the months I'd saved, of the jars lined up in the pantry labeled for Mariana's wedding. I thought of meals skipped, of overtime done. There was, under all that, a stubborn seed of expectation that is maybe the oldest thing about a parent. You save not because you own the future, but because you love the body that will live in it. You might expect a lawyer to calculate this moment with cold precision, where to push, where to relent. I was that lawyer for a minute, calculating, measuring, choosing a line of words that would not inflame but would hold. But beneath the strategy was a woman who had loved fiercely and been told, in the most intimate way possible, that she would be hidden. After a while, Raphael left the room, slamming the door on his way out. The sound echoed like a punctuation mark. Mariana didn't follow. She sat, hands in her lap like a lost child, and the dress I held felt heavier than before. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally, the words thin. "Because I couldn't be a secret in my daughter's life," I said. "Because love doesn't ask to be hidden. Because paying for something doesn't make you less deserving of respect." She said nothing for a long time. I watched her phone, its screen still lighting with messages. It struck me then how much our lives live on these little rectangles, how easily they make us feel seen or invisible. There was a sting of pity. She had chosen to protect an image, and that choice had cost her the person who had protected her for decades. "Can you unpause?" she asked me eventually. It was a small, desperate plea. "I can discuss it with the vendors," I said, "but it won't be the same unless we also discuss why you felt the need to hide me." She looked up at me then, eyes rimmed with a sudden wetness. The mascara she'd worn in the morning had already run from some earlier irritation, telltale streaks down her cheek. "They said we'd be judged," she said. "Raphael's family, they think a mother who worked with her hands is different. They said things about the way you dress, the places you go. I didn't want to have to explain it at a party. I didn't want you to be a spectacle," I finished for her. "No," she said, and the denial was small and immediate. "Not a spectacle, just not the right fit." I thought of Beatrice, my sister, who had once told me that people could be kind, or they'd be cruel, but that social cruelty wore smiles. I thought of Mrs. Celia bringing over an extra cup of coffee the day after my back surgery. I thought of the way community can both sustain and savage someone depending on whose favor it keeps. The world had been teaching her lessons I assumed I'd taught, about kindness, about endurance. Instead, the lesson had become about conformity. "I won't be anyone's secret," I told her again. "And if that means we need to reshape this wedding or step back altogether, then we need to do that openly." She swallowed. "We could pay you back." "You could," I said. "But what I want is not remuneration. It's respect." Realizing that a line had to be drawn, I sat back and watched her face. There was a child in her, the way she cupped her chin with a hand the size of a cup, looking suddenly unsure how to be human in a room where her choices had consequences. I thought of the years I had knit into her, how each small sacrifice was not a ledger item, but an act of faith. I thought of the quiet pride I'd felt seeing her graduate, seeing her first job, watching her taste life. I also thought of the times she'd flinched from my coat because it smelled like the bus, or when she'd lowered her voice if a person looked askance at us. She had learned, over time, to hide the traces of our struggle. It had become a second skin. "Listen," I said finally, "I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because being invisible in the life I built with you is a different kind of pain." She looked at me then in a way I hadn't seen since she was small, like a child wanting to be forgiven for breaking a vase. "I'm sorry," she said, a small, raw thing. The apology was immediate and real, but I could see how fragile it was, how easily it might be undone by an outsider's approval. It was a long afternoon after that. The providers called, the event planner left us 10 polite voicemails. The seamstress asked for a brief explanation she didn't press for. The seam ripper I'd used to alter my own coats seemed now a tool for a new purpose, unpicking assumptions. For the first time in many months, the future we'd been holding like a promise dangled in a way I hadn't anticipated. There was panic, there was negotiation, there was the awful practical arithmetic of deposits, schedules, and availability. I recognized the lines in the contracts because I had signed them. It gave me leverage, it gave me responsibility. But here's something I learned in that small, hot hour. Consequences are not the same as punishment. My actions were not meant to be vengeance. They were a mirror. I understood then that to force a person to look at the reflection of their choices is a form of mercy. Harsh, yes, but honest. I also understood that the reflection could fracture a relationship if handled without care. "Can we talk?" Mariana asked later when the initial shock had ebbed. She sat on the arm of the couch, knees close to her chest. Her hair was a soft halo around her face, the way it had been when she was young, and for a moment I saw both of her ages at once, the little girl who needed me to braid her hair, and the woman who feared being excluded from a circle that promised everything she wanted. We talked for hours. Not because everything was resolved. We spoke because we had to place words where the silence had been. I told her about the nights I'd worked 2 jobs when she was a toddler, and how I'd thought of those jars in the pantry as a future. I told her about the time I pawned a watch to pay for a tutor when she floundered, and how I felt proud of that choice because it meant she didn't have to quit school. I told her about the small, secret ceremonies a mother keeps: a warm soup left on a sick day, a stitched hem repaired on a coat for a job interview, and how those acts are not poor things, they are the grammar of love. She told me about Raphael's family, about the offhand remarks that had been made at dinner parties, and the suggestions that perhaps she should introduce me as an old friend lest they whisper. She spoke of fear, dread really, that acceptance into a new family might be endangered by my presence. She confessed that she had grander dreams for herself now, and part of those dreams required shedding any ties that made others uncomfortable. We circled the painful truths with the kind of care one uses around a sleeping animal, gently, respectfully, and with the possibility of being bitten if mishandled. The words were not clean. There were accusations that came out sideways like splinters. There were admissions, too, like small, bright beads on a thread. At the end of the day, when the light had softened and the house cooled, I took the navy dress out again. It was still folded, patient. I smoothed it on the back of a chair and felt the familiar tug of memory. The dress had been an offer, a mother's way of stepping into a child's new life without imposing. Now it felt like a test. "Tell me," I said to her in the hush, "do you want me at your wedding because you love me, or because it looks right?" She looked at me like someone trying to find the exact spot on a map. "I want you there," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to tell them. I'm ashamed." Shame, I have learned, is a corrosive thing. It makes people small in the guise of protecting them. But it is not an immutable truth. The moment you name it, it becomes a thing you can address. "If you want me there, we will make it clear," I said, "but not by hiding what I am." She nodded slowly. It was not a solution. It was a beginning. "Listen," I said, and then remembered the sequence of messages I had sent. I had been forceful, yes, but not cruel. I had exercised the right that comes with bearing the name on contracts. I want to be careful in how I tell this part, because I don't want anyone taking this as a formula for retribution. There is nothing tactical about what I did. There was only an insistence that respect be part of love's currency. In the quiet that followed, Mariana's phone buzzed again. More messages from vendors, more reminders of the world we had reached our hands into. Those little pings were the drumbeat of consequence. I watched them with a kind of detached sorrow, like watching rain hit a porch and knowing you can't stop the weather. "Can you—" she began, and then stopped. "I will speak to them again," I said. "If you're asking me to unpause, to try to fix this without unraveling what needs to be said, then we can do that. But it will require honesty. It will require you to tell Raphael and his family the truth about what matters." She looked away, and for a moment the child in her reappeared, small and unguarded. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if they choose them? What if they choose being comfortable over me?" "No one can choose you away," I said. "But some people will choose comfort in the short term. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you have decisions to make." That night, I left her apartment with the dress folded back onto my arm. The navy fabric felt like the weight of an unspoken compromise. Outside, the street smelled of rain and asphalt. Mrs. Celia waved from her balcony, concerned eyes soft with neighborly care. I thought of Beatrice and considered calling her right away. Instead, I walked home slowly, letting the city fill my ears with its ordinary noises. The hum of tires, the distant talk of people returning from work. For all the drama of the day, the world went on with steady indifference. That, oddly, was comforting. At home, when I set the dress on my bed, I sat for a long time and stitched a single seam on an older coat. An old habit that calms me. I threaded the needle and held the fabric to my palm and thought of the many small stitches that had held my life together. Sometimes I think motherhood is a series of stitches. Not always visible, sometimes messy, but meant to hold a shape together until the seams can be stronger. I did not sleep well. My mind replayed the day's exchanges like a recording. Words, pings, the sound of a door closing. I thought about the way dignity can be neglected in small social choices, and the way people can measure worth by the wrong scales. In the morning, the phone was a small drum. The photographer called first. "Ms. Martins," he said, in that practiced professional tone, "we received your request to pause. We will hold the date for 1 week pending confirmation. Please advise." The caterer wanted to know whether we intended to proceed with the original guest list. The band offered alternative dates. The seamstress asked if she should finish the hem or hold it. Every call was a practical echo of emotional choices. I handled them with the calm efficiency of someone used to making things happen, but inside, I felt raw. Mariana called later that day. Her voice was small but steadier. "Can you come by?" she asked. "I want to talk." "Yes," I said. "I'll come." When I arrived, the apartment felt changed by that week's delay. The air had the tension of something unresolved. Mariana greeted me at the door with her hair in a loose bun and eyes that had a gray tiredness to them. Raphael was not there. I didn't ask where he'd gone. We sat at her small kitchen table again, the navy dress folded on a chair like a pending promise. The sun slanted through the window in a way that made the dust look like gold. For a moment, that light made the dress shimmer, and I thought of how small things can become luminous when they are held in honest hands. "Helena," she said, and there was a steadiness to her tone now that had not been there a week before. "I received messages from the vendors. They're hesitant. Raphael is furious. His family is pressuring him. I don't know what he's going to do." "Then we speak," I said. "We speak in a way that protects you and honors me. But you have to be willing to tell the truth, to tell them who I am and why it matters." She nodded. "I'm scared they'll leave me." "Let them," I said plainly. "A choice like that will tell you everything you need to know about what you're walking into." She looked at me as if weighing a new weight. "I don't want to lose you," she said. "You won't," I said, "but you may lose something else if you choose the easy path now. And sometimes losing the easy path is how you find your way." Our conversation wasn't neat. It wasn't a script. There were long silences, sudden flares of anger, tears, and the small humor that can puncture tension when two people know each other's bodies too well. We spoke of grandparents, of my mother who taught me to sew, of the way my father used to whistle as he painted the fence. We found ourselves laughing at an old memory of a birthday gone sideways when she was 7, and half the cake disappeared, only to be found in the neighbor's doghouse. Laughter, I realized, has the power to stitch wounds as much as words do. But even laughter has limits. As the afternoon light softened into evening, the rhythm of the phone started again. More messages, more pings. The day had rearranged itself in a way neither of us entirely expected. I was torn between wanting to keep the moment soft and needing to make clear that the hold I had initiated would not be rescinded because of pressure or a desire for social convenience. "I sent something to your phone," I said suddenly, "before we talk." She looked up sharply. "What?" "A note to the vendors. I explained that the arrangements were on hold and that we needed to discuss things." I did not use threats. I used facts. The contract names were under my name. Her face closed in a way that told me she felt exposed. "You didn't?" "I did," I said simply, "and I'm prepared to stand by it." She swallowed. "Why?" "Because being hidden is not a kindness," I said, "and because you deserve a family that knows who you love and why." She looked at the phone on the table and then at me, the reality settling in like rain. She reached for her own device and scrolled. The pings were still coming, but now they were tinged with a different urgency, one that had the shape of reckoning. "Raphael is on his way," she said. "Then we will talk," I said. "We will be honest." When he arrived, he stormed in as if the house were an arena. "What did you do?" he demanded, circling like someone ready to land a blow but uncertain of the target. "I paused their work," I said. I asked them to wait for confirmation. That is my right. I paid the deposits. My name is on the contracts." He looked at me like I had betrayed a secret. "You can't just—" "Actually, I can," I replied, "and I will if it means we don't pretend my presence is something we paid to hide." His face went red. "You're making this about you." "Everything about a wedding is about someone," I said. "I happen to be someone's mother." There was a loud, raucous sound then, doors being slammed, voices raised outside. A neighbor had come with a loose bucket of gossip, and the news often travels faster than a wedding planner. I heard the cadence of rumors forming like a chorus. It hit me that whatever we did next would be witnessed by an audience that prefers spectacle to nuance. Raphael moved closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous timbre. "You will make this impossible," he hissed. "They will think we are disorganized." "Better to be honest and disorganized than to pretend and be ashamed," I said. At that, he laughed, a short, brittle sound that might have been meant to wound. "You think you're saving anyone?" "No," I said. "I'm saving myself from being invisible." For a guilty second, I almost felt triumph. I set that feeling aside quickly. Triumph tasted like coal in my mouth because it didn't solve the hurt. It simply made me feel less helpless. Our exchange was interrupted when Mariana's phone erupted with a new message. An email from Raphael's sister, forwarded along with a curt note. "This is getting out of hand." He glared at his phone and then back at me. "You did this in public," he said. "You made it public." "I didn't make it," I answered. "I made it true." He left then, with a slammed door that rattled the frames of the pictures on the wall. The apartment felt hollow for a moment, as if the air had been wrung out. I sat back down and exhaled slowly, feeling the sudden tiredness of a woman who had spent too many years carrying children on her hips and burdens in her heart. "Do you regret it?" Mariana asked later, after the initial tremor had passed. I thought about how to answer that without hurting her further. "No," I said. "Not regret. I'm sad about the hurt, but I'm not sorry for refusing to be hidden." She nodded, her face clouded. "What if they never forgive us?" "Then we will live with the consequences," I said. "Forgiveness often begins with truth. Sometimes the truth requires a price." We sat in the dwindling light and talked of small things, of music, of her favorite teacher, of the soup she claimed only I could make. It was like quilting, bringing small, familiar pieces together to block out the cold. Later that evening, exhausted but restless, I typed one more message. This was not to shame, not to gloat. It was a simple, factual notice sent to the vendors and to Mariana's phone. Arrangements paused at the payer's request. We will reconvene to decide the best path forward. Please await confirmation. I hit send and felt a curious lightness. Not victory, not even peace. Something like an acceptance of consequence. The pings tapered off for a while, but the quiet was only temporary. In the hours that followed, messages began to thread like a net across the city's small sounds. And then, just as I was beginning to fold the navy dress back into its protective cover, Mariana's phone lit with a different kind of notification. It was a message she hadn't expected. It was a message she hadn't expected. She opened it like someone peels a bruise, careful at first, then with the inevitability of the touch. The text was from Raphael, short, brutal, and precise. "We need to talk. I can't do this if your mother is going to make things difficult." There are words that arrive like a cold wind through an open door. Mine was one of them. For a moment, the room shrank to the size of our breathing. Her face went white, then red, then small. She read it twice, thumb hovering, as if the correct reply might present itself by repetition. It didn't. The next messages came faster, frantic, pleading. A forwarded email from Raphael's sister, with awkward apologies that actually read like accusations. A curt note from the event planner, Given the current dispute, the hall cannot guarantee staff until this is resolved. A call from the photographer that dissolved into a voicemail containing nothing but procedural facts and a quiet, professional exhaustion. We need clarity before we can proceed. "He's leaving," Mariana whispered. "Do you want him to leave?" I asked, because even in that raw second, I wanted to know the truth beneath the panic. She looked at me as if trying to remember who she used to be. "I don't know," she said finally. "I thought I wanted to marry him. I thought." You think you know the contours of your life until someone pulls the fabric and the pattern of it distorts. I had paid for years of her life in small stitches, the tutor, the coat, the violin lessons, and still, here we were at a seam that revealed an old tear. She called him. The math of it made my stomach hollow. Deposits that might be lost, vendors trying to recoup, the awkward conversations that would ripple out. Then, unexpectedly, it all collapsed, not because of strategy, but because of exhaustion. Raphael's family, who had sought a picture-perfect day, closed ranks. There was pressure, whispered judgments, and a steadily mounting toll of embarrassment. Raphael called Mariana, and, with a voice I've heard on many ends, children of parents who choose image over person, said that they could not proceed in a way that would attract awkward questions at family dinners. In his hesitance, the relationship's fragile architecture gave way. He proposed an ultimatum. She could have the wedding her family expected if she would simply ask me to stay away, or she could choose me. The ultimatum arrived like a flat stone, skimming the surface of what had once been affection. She did not answer immediately. She sat with it like one sits with a difficult diagnosis, trying to find a place inside to hold both the love and the cost. When she finally told me that Raphael had ended things, no dramatic shouting match, only a weary goodbye that fell like a door quietly shutting, I felt something in me unclench and then break in a different way. There was sorrow, yes, but there was also a strange relief. The relationship had revealed who he was not by his charming vows, but by the choices he let himself make when pressured. Mariana retreated into a grief that felt both adolescent and profoundly adult. She vacillated between blaming me and thanking me, between bitterness and an apology that kept dissolving into tears. She said that she had been ashamed of who we had been, ashamed that our lives did not mirror the glossy images she now craved. I told her what I always try to tell clients in court, and what every mother hopes a child will understand without being forced. Shame is often a social currency that one generation uses to buy its comfort at the cost of another's dignity. But she had been young, and the temptation of belonging was real. There were consequences beyond the broken engagement. Friends who had lined up to give toasts found themselves awkwardly balancing fairness and their own social tastes. Some tried to mediate, others chose silence. A few relatives who had liked us from across distance now offered thin support that looked suspiciously like disapproval. I felt the sting, not because I believed I deserved uncritical adoration, no one does, but because the fabric of trust that I had sown with years of small sacrifices had been pulled taut and frayed. In the rubble, support came in quiet forms. Dona Celia brought a stew that fed us for days. Beatrice sat with me, and, between folds of conversation, reminded me we were not defined by one event. My clients, a spattering of people who knew me through a different name, through matters that had nothing to do with family, sent messages of solidarity. There were calls from other mothers who had recognized the script. The idea that a parent could be made to disappear for the sake of a social photograph. "You're allowed to refuse to be small," one woman wrote. And for reasons that were not entirely legal or clever, that sentence steadied me. There were moments, too, that made me flinch with the cost of my choice. I saw the traces of isolation in Mariana. She stopped answering some friends' calls. She avoided places where the memory might press against her. And sometimes she walked with her hands in her pockets, as if braced for the next social blow. Watching her shrink made me reconsider and revisit each step. Had I been too rigid? Could kindness have been expressed differently? I ask these questions because part of what being a mother means is holding responsibility, not only for your actions, but for their aftermath. Time, which does not heal so much as it rearranges the pieces, started to work. Mariana sought counsel, real, intentional talk, with someone not of our family. She called me one afternoon from the back of a counseling session and admitted, haltingly, that she had been protecting an image she feared would otherwise collapse. "I was trying to be loved by a version of life I didn't know how to name," she said. "Naming is the first step out of shame," a therapist once told me. It seemed true. We rebuilt slowly. The navy dress remained folded in my closet for months, a patient witness. I would take it out sometimes and press my hand to the fabric, as if to feel the memory. Sewing became my therapy. I mended coats, hemmed curtains, and in the quiet of needle and thread, I let myself think through what dignity required. Dignity, I told myself, was not triumph. It was the ordinary courage of refusing to make oneself small so someone else could be comfortable. There was an evening, weeks after the collapse, when Mariana sat down across from me at the small kitchen table. She had returned to the city with a different light in her eyes, softer, rawer, and without the polished sheen of someone trying to fit a picture. "Can we talk?" she asked, the way one might invite a neighbor in to assess the damage after a storm. We talked for hours, not as prosecutor and defendant, but as two people who had weathered different parts of the same life. She apologized, not in the way that retracts hurt without understanding, but in a manner that acknowledged the cost. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "I thought I was protecting myself. Instead, I made you into a secret." Hearing the apology was a relief because it meant understanding had returned. It wasn't total reconciliation, it was a step toward it. She asked how I had felt when she told me she didn't want me at the wedding. "Humiliated," I admitted. "Invisible." She flinched, and I thought of the many ways parents and children inflict small cuts on each other by living imperfectly in the same story. She asked what she could do to make amends. I listed none of the ledger items she expected. I didn't ask for money. I did not ask for an elaborate public confession. What I did ask for were small, ordinary things. Honesty. Presence without apology. An acknowledgement in conversation, not performed for guests, but true. She agreed. Part of the healing was structural. We set boundaries that weren't punitive but practical. If there were to be future family events, they would be planned in honesty. If contributions were offered, they would be acknowledged openly. We agreed on phrases she could use if under pressure. "My mother is part of my life, and I want her there." Simple, clear, hard when social discomfort presses in, but true. There were days when the community whispered like winter wind, but the whispers meant less as they learned we would not be shamed into invisibility. Some relationships recalibrated, some did not. A cousin who had been distant came for a small dinner, and spoke of how, in his own youth, he'd felt ashamed of his father's hands. "It takes courage," he said to Mariana, "to choose family when it's easier to choose image." That small admission felt like silk on an old bruise. In time, Mariana dated other people. Some were kind, some were less brave. She learned, slowly and not without missteps, how to call herself to account for the parts of her that wanted comfortable assimilation rather than complicated truth. Our relationship was not restored to its former shape. It had to be remade with new seams and firmer stitches. That remaking included therapy sessions together, where we practiced the kind of conversations that do not explode into hurt. It included visits to my church on quiet Sundays, where we would sit 2 pews apart and listen to the organ pull at things we didn't yet have words for. It included cooking together on a rainy afternoon, where the act of feeding each other became simple ritual, and a reminder that affection is built by small, repeated acts. Months later, there was a knock at my door. It was Mariana, not pressing but holding a small envelope. Inside was a note she had written. No grandeur, only plainness. asking if I would come to a small family dinner she was planning. No speeches, she wrote, just us, and if you want, bring that navy dress. She had put her life back together enough to want me visible in it, not hidden. The invite was tentative, but it was real. I accepted. At the dinner, Raphael was not present. His absence was the quiet testimony of choices. We ate, talked, and the conversation was ordinary. There were moments of awkwardness. Old habits die slowly. But there was also laughter, the kind that knits people. At one point, Mariana reached across the table and touched my hand. "Thank you," she said, and the words were brief but true. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something quieter, relief that honesty had been possible, and a sadness for the part of my daughter that had been taught to think shame is survival. I also felt the steadiness that comes from having once declared a boundary and then lived with its consequences. If there's a lesson I take from that chapter of my life, it's that boundaries are acts of love, not revenge. Saying no to humiliation does not guarantee a soft landing. It may bruise, it will require repair, but it insists that love and dignity are not mutually exclusive. Standing for yourself does not mean abandoning your child. Often it means saving them from a life that expects them to betray what matters most. I have told this story so many times now, sometimes to clients who sit across from me, sometimes to women at the church whose children are growing up in a world that measures worth in appearances. I tell it not as a strategy, but as a confession. I acted in a way that felt right to me in that moment, guided by a life of quiet work and the knowledge that one's name on a contract is not the same thing as being invisible to the people you love. I am a lawyer by trade, and I use the instruments available to me: names on contracts, deposits, the simple legal fact that a payer can instruct vendors, because those were the literal threads that connected my sacrifices to her day. But the real work was not legal, it was moral. It was the decision to refuse to be someone who could be hidden. Whatever leverage I had came not from cunning, but from having placed my name where I stood in the world, and then insisting that the world treat that presence with the respect it deserved. If this resonates with you, tell me where you're watching from. It's small, but reading your words has become one of the ways I feel less alone telling this story. Today, our relationship with Mariana is different. It is bounded by clearer honesty. We have rebuilt with hands that know how to mend. She no longer speaks of love as something that requires erasure of the past. She now speaks of choices, of who she wants in her life and why. We built new rituals: the Sunday phone call, the birthday walk, small evenings when we cook together. Those are the stitches that matter. I do not pretend everything is perfect. There are days when the ache returns, when I see a dress advertisement and feel the prick of memory. But I also know that there are lives I have kept intact by refusing to be erased, and a daughter who learned, painfully and then deliberately, how to choose people who will not demand she leave parts of herself at the door. If you've been in a place where you've been asked to be someone less than you are, if you've been made into someone to be hidden, know that asking for respect is not a radical act, but a human one. It may cost you comfort, it may cost you old attachments, but it can buy you dignity. In our case, the cost was steep, but the return, the slow, careful work of rebuilding, has been worth it. If you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have a story of boundaries, reconciliation, or dignity, leave it in the comments. I read them, and your words keep this conversation alive.